Let's talk about etiquette, politeness. Um, I've probably featured this one before, but yeah, that long-awaited analysis of my channel, cleanup of my channel is still to come. It might well be that I talk about a subject and it's just more concise or better than a previous video. No, I'm British, and I suspect a lot of my subscribers are, but I also would say a lot of my subscribers are from around the world. United States, Brazil, Turkey, lots of different countries I've seen. I've looked at the analytics and I seem to have a fairly good diverse range of people. Um, One of the stereotypes about the British is that we are quite polite. It's sort of a contradiction here because it very much contradicts the image of the British football hooligan. Just to give maybe an extreme example, the problem was so bad in the 70s and 80s and up to the 90s that became known as the English disease or the British disease when it also involved Scottish hooligans. Um, that's an obvious contradiction from this idea of kind of the polite British gentleman. I mean, football hooligans are some of the most obnoxious, unpleasant individuals you'll come across. So there's a contradiction there. Also, for people who have this idea of Britain as kind of a Mary Poppins type environment, yeah, the reality is we have some very, very unpleasant individuals in this country, as there are everywhere, of course. But they very much fly in the face of that stereotype if you come across these people. Any British viewers will know what I'm talking about. So, I just thought it would be an interesting sort of thing to talk about because it's Chinese New Year now today, the year of the ox, which actually happens to be my year. I was born in 1985. That's the year of the ox. This year is the metal ox. So Xinyan Kuai to any Chinese speakers. Um, why do I mention that? Well, I think there's cultural differentiations in what is seen as polite. Um, I would say some things are fairly universal, but there are also quite a lot of differences in understanding. One that I would cite about the UK is that in our shopping centres, it's a pretty normal thing for the shopping assistant, the cashier, to be pretty polite, say to the customer, "Hi, how are you? Would you like a bag?" And you'll notice there's a lot of pleases and thank yous. Now, when I was at university, my German friends were rather surprised by this. They said, "Well, why are they saying that? They don't know me." So their thinking was, that's a stranger, why be so polite? I think the logic is they're representatives of the company, so they need to give a good public image. Um, Now, about myself, I do value politeness a lot, and I therefore have a problem with unnecessary rudeness. But I think it's important to understand this a little bit. I think context is very important. So if I'm angry with someone, chances are I'm not going to be overly polite. And if I'm very angry, I'm going to be downright abrasive because that's the nature of being angry. So when I'm talking about politeness, there are certain situations when it's a little bit unrealistic to expect people to be overly polite. Um, I don't beat around the bush when it comes to being candid about certain things. But when I'm talking about politeness, my understanding of it is a day-to-day basis. But I think the British have a reputation even for being polite in tense situations when perhaps in other cultures that would be long dropped. So an example of this would be anyone who's seen the film Love Actually. There's a scene when Alan Rickman's character is in a fancy department store in London being served by Rowan Atkinson, and he's getting a present for his wife and it's being wrapped up. And this is a pretty fancy store, so there's all sorts of little um, accessories and that's kind of the joke. It's a comedy film, a romantic comedy. Anyone who's seen the film, it's a pretty well-known film. You'll know the scene I mean. But what's funny about it is, although Alan Rickman's character is clearly getting quite peeved off and irritated by this unnecessary sort of frills, and he's kind of a bit pushed for time. He's sort of like, can we be quite quick? Can we be quite quick? I think in many other countries it would be like, come on, buddy, I'm in a rush, you know. So that sort of cautiousness, I think, is quite a British thing, and it's not entirely a bad thing. But we sometimes do master the art of understatement. When World War One broke out, and again, this might sound like an extreme example, apparently Lord Grey, who was Foreign Secretary at the time, when Germany replied, or rather didn't reply to the ultimatum that we set in the lead up to war, his response was it was somewhat disappointing. Somewhat disappointing. This was the eve of World War One. So that's another thing I think we might have a reputation for is understating things. There's also this British stereotype of the stiff upper lip and stoicism. That's probably a good thing, and I think it's definitely true. Um, of course, a lot of countries have been through a lot of things. Some countries have been through much worse than Britain has with historic events, but that might come from the spirit of the Blitz, this idea of sort of toughing it out, which is deeply ingrained, I think, in the British psyche. Of course, that's not universal, but it's something that, you know, is kind of in our culture. But my own attitude to politeness is quite basic. And an example of this would be around presents, gifts, giving someone something. I'm a little bit old fashioned. If someone gives me something, it could be a cup of tea or I don't drive, but a BMW. I'm saying thank you. Now, there might be circumstances where you know someone so well, or it's a family member or something like that, and I know this is true in China, where the word thank you isn't used in every situation because they say it's too formal. Now, I don't see the word thank you as formal. I see it as just basic politeness. Um, that's why you'll find British people, we even say please and thank you to our family members because it's not seen as a formal thing. It's seen as it's seen as what it is, just polite, civil. Um, so for me, the word thank you, as an example, if I gave someone a present and they just kind of took it and they didn't say anything, I'd be a little bit angry is too strong a word, but I'd be a little bit, perhaps a little bit annoyed, thinking, well, okay, you're welcome. It's it's something that if I was a business person and I was employing people, I'd be looking out for things like that. Customer service is something I feel very strongly about, well, quite strongly about, because there's a world of difference between giving a smile, being polite, versus being cold and uninterested. And too many companies, I think, don't train their staff sufficiently, especially in situations like transport services. British railway companies are notoriously frustrating. They're overpriced, they're not that reliable. And more often than not, I don't think big companies sufficiently really understand the frustration that customers, commuters go through. So I think it's very important that they, say sorry if a train's delayed or, they don't always do that. This might sound like nitpicking, it might sound like being petty, but I don't think it is. I think it can make a difference to, someone's day even. If someone's having a difficult day, something as simple as someone smiling and being polite, I think it actually has the power to cheer them up a little bit. It might not change the whole day, but I think it matters. As an example of this, I had an optician's appointment the other day, Now, because of lockdown, there was restrictions. This is actually for a particular job that I'm applying for, and with this job, it can only be done at certain opticians. Okay, it's not MI6, so I'm not being secretive. It's just I don't want to go into details about the job yet because I haven't got it. But suffice to say, it required going to the metro centre, which, if you live in the northeast, is it's a bit of a journey from Sunderland. Now, with the snow and so on, I was a little bit stressed out. I was thinking, is the metro going to be running? Am I going to have to get bus replacement? Will I get there on time? I was a bit stressed out because I needed to get to this appointment. Now, when I arrived, they were very professional, and I have to say, the optician, young woman from Northern Ireland, actually, my part of the world, was very polite, very approachable, and I immediately felt better just because it helped that she was quite cute as well. But that's beside the point. No, seriously, I think that friendly demeanor goes a long way in public service. It really does. And I've done a bit of till work. I've worked in charity shops, even in that context, which isn't like the high end of the market, obviously. I always try to be polite to customers. I always try to be professional because it's the way I would want to be treated. Um, just a question of basic empathy. Um, of course, people can be too rigid, and I'm not one for sort of like, for example, if someone catches their finger in a door and they let off a load of swear words, I'm hardly going to judge them for that. Some people are a bit funny about excessive or that sort of swearing. Yeah, that sort of situation I totally understand. Excessive swearing, I just think I'm not offended by it, but I think it's unnecessary. It suggests to me there's limited that person has limited vocabulary. Uh, but it's an interesting subject. I do think upbringing's a big thing. When I see children who get presents and they don't say thank you, I'm immediately thinking, okay, that's their parents. Their parents have a bad attitude. Their parents won't teach them basic manners. Um, I think it's extremely important with children. Of course, with any of this stuff, you can overdo it, and it can be too stiff and too ordered. That isn't a good thing. But I do value basic manners. If I'm late for someone, I will immediately apologize. The situations where people don't, they just lack common courtesy. If they've inconvenienced someone else, there's a few occasions I've been, maybe I slept in, maybe it was something that I just didn't really organize as well as I should have, and I've known that I screwed up, so I apologized because I knew that that would annoy me. So I kind of, I guess one lesson we can learn in life is that not everyone shares our values. So sometimes I've made the mistake of holding my values with other people. So because I try to treat people in a certain way, I expect them to treat me in a certain way, and I'm get a bit pissed off if I'm not. I'm pretty controlled. I wouldn't necessarily show my temper or anything like that, but yeah, it would bug me a little bit. And I guess the lesson is some people just don't have the same values. Maybe their values is something else. But as a basic premise, I think just please, thank you, and trying to be reliable are important things. Let me know your thoughts. Let me know what the situation is in your part of the world. I would say in Britain, politeness is quite a big thing. That, of course, doesn't mean that everyone's polite. Some British people are extremely rude. So I guess that's another thing. What one person deems to be rudeness, someone else might deem to be honesty. I don't know. But it's just little things like if I hold a door open for someone and they just give like a look that's like, not even a nod of thank you or something. Um, if it's a language barrier, surely body language counts for something. I mean, there's certain things I don't think people have an excuse for because they are universal. Body language, for the most part, is universal. So I don't think a language barrier is an excuse not to, to kind of. It's also important to understand other cultures when you travel. That goes without saying, right? Let me know your thoughts.